Continuing from last chapter, Lin Dong entered a mysterious area and underwent a trial through a sea composed of lightning. The sea of lightning surged, with silvery bolts of lightning crackling as arcs of electricity danced around. The entire scene gave off an intimidating atmosphere. Lin Dong, for his part, remained on high alert in the face of this sudden shift. Though he had grown somewhat accustomed to the lightning sea after half a month of navigating through it, he knew full well that if this vast sea of thunder truly went berserk, even a single wave could reduce him to ashes. Brilliant golden light quickly spread from his body, and within that shining gold, faint flashes of silver occasionally flickered, as if lightning itself was leaping through him. This made him appear even more powerful and resilient. After half a month of relentless forging, Lin Dong's physical body had clearly reached a new level of toughness. As Lin Dong concentrated on the turbulent sea of lightning, little Mink reappeared beside him, its eyes filled with surprise as it gazed at the raging scene. Crash! Under the watchful eyes of both Lin Dong and little Mink, the sea of lightning grew more and more violent. The once silver sea now took on an even deeper and darker hue. Lin Dong's pupils suddenly constricted as he stared at the increasingly dark color. In the next moment, he saw it. A colossal shadow was slowly rising from the depths of the sea. Though the shadow was blurry, it was enormous, so vast that it covered an area of nearly 1,000 meters in radius. Just thinking about its size made Lin Dong's scalp tingle. Without hesitation, he swiftly retreated. As Lin Dong hurriedly backed away, enormous waves surged up from the sea of lightning. With a thunderous crash, a gigantic wave exploded outward, falling back to the sea with an earth-shaking force. In that brief moment, it felt as if even space itself trembled. Wave after wave crashed over Lin Dong, with lightning plasma wrapping around his body, arcs of electricity erupting continuously. Even with his increasingly fortified body, the ferocious power of the waves blasted him hundreds of meters back before he finally began to slow down. When his feet finally touched the sea surface again, Lin Dong immediately looked up. His expression changed dramatically. Ahead of him on the sea surface appeared a titanic creature, its size so immense that it seemed to stretch endlessly. Its deep azure body was covered in gleaming scales, its form coiling and twisting like a mighty iron chain. An overwhelming pressure radiated from it, akin to the divine wrath of the heavens. In that moment, Lin Dong could feel even the spiritual energy surrounding him being forcefully pushed back into his Yuewen palace by the sheer weight of the creature's presence. A dragon? Lin Dong's mouth went dry as he stared at the enormous creature, his voice carrying a trace of panic. He had seen many powerful demon beasts, some even possessing dragon bloodlines, but none could compare to the sheer difference between them and the massive creature before him. The difference was like that between a ruler and his subjects. In the demon beast world, the mysterious and powerful dragon clan clearly stood at the very top. Azure dragon? Little Mink, perched on Lin Dong's shoulder, was also shocked by the sudden appearance of the massive creature. But soon after, a strange look flickered in its eyes. It licked its lips and snickered. Who would have thought we'd encounter a Azure dragon, one of the pure-blooded dragon clan? Brings back memories. Hearing this, Lin Dong's eye twitched. Had this guy actually eaten a dragon before? Could the heavenly demon Mink clan really be so fierce that they'd dare to challenge the top-tier dragon clan head-on? Little Mink waved its paw, releasing a circle of purple-black light that enveloped Lin Dong, shielding him from the overwhelming pressure. Though the dragon clan is strong, they're not invincible in the demon beast world. Apart from my heavenly demon Mink clan, there are other powerful species that love picking fights with them. For example, the Qiong clan. Those guys' favorite food is dragons. Of course, the dragon clan isn't some weakling either. Even the Qiong pay a heavy price if they want a dragon feast, and sometimes they end up getting eaten themselves. The two clans have been bitter enemies for ages, Little Mink said with a laugh. Lin Dong wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, realizing just how complex the world of demon beasts truly was. These creatures were born with extraordinary abilities, far surpassing humans in terms of innate talent. Compared to them, humans were at a significant disadvantage. Some people might train their entire lives and still not be a match for a newly born demon beast. Heh, I never thought I'd encounter a member of the heavenly demon mink clan here. Just as Lin Dong was wiping his sweat, a soft laugh echoed through the lightning sea. Upon hearing the voice, Lin Dong quickly looked up, his gaze locking onto the enormous dragon's head. There, atop the colossal Azure dragon, sat a figure in green robes, calmly cross-legged. The figure was quite handsome, with a gentle smile that gave off a scholarly, refined aura. If he had a folding fan in his hand, he would look no different from a learned scholar. That guy, like the Azure dragon, is just a remnant shadow. Don't be so shocked, little Mink said nonchalantly, noticing Lin Dong's tense stance. If I'm not mistaken, he must be the one who created this space. He should be the master of this Azure Dragon Hall. Heh, my name is Qing, though most call me the Azure Dragon King, the figure in green robes said with a smile. Azure Dragon King, Qing, Lin Dong's eyes narrowed slightly. It seemed this man was indeed the ruler of the Azure Dragon Hall, as well as one of the leaders of the Tiangang Alliance. It's been so many years and finally, someone has made it here. Before you, others have also tried to pass, but they all ended up buried in this sea of lightning, Qing said with a faint smile as he looked down at Lin Dong. Junior Lin Dong greets the Azure Dragon King. Lin Dong cupped his fists and bowed. No matter what, when facing an ancient figure like this, even if it was just a shadow, it was better to be respectful. Enough with the formalities. You came here for the inheritance of the Azure Dragon Hall, didn't you? Since his remnant shadow has appeared, that means you've already passed the Azure Dragon trial. He should just hand over the inheritance now, little Mink said impatiently, rolling his eyes. Lin Dong felt a bit exasperated by little Mink's bluntness, clearly at a loss for words. Heh, he's not wrong. Passing the Azure Dragon trial does indeed qualify you to receive the inheritance of the Azure Dragon Hall, Qing said with a smile. His gaze then fell on Lin Dong, and in that instant, Lin Dong felt as though his entire body had been laid bare under the man's scrutiny. Buzz. This kind of overwhelming inspection was something Lin Dong couldn't resist. However, just as he was feeling helpless, the mysterious stone talisman, the devouring ancestral talisman, and even the ancient cosmic formation within him began to tremble. A ripple of energy spread outward like lightning. Boom. The air in front of him seemed to explode, and the body of Qing, who sat atop the Azure Dragon, trembled slightly. For the first time, a trace of surprise flickered in his otherwise calm eyes. Heh, don't be fooled by this kid's unassuming appearance. He's not someone you can casually peer into, at least not in your current state. If your true form were here, maybe you'd have a better shot, little Mink said with a mischievous grin. Heh, it seems I've underestimated him. I didn't expect such treasures to be hidden within his body, Qing said, his surprise quickly fading as he chuckled. All right, enough chit-chat. Hand over the inheritance already, little Mink urged, waving its paw. Qing smiled warmly and nodded. Since you've made it this far, you indeed qualify to obtain the Azure Dragon Hall's inheritance. However, I can offer you two choices. Oh. Lin Dong raised an eyebrow in slight surprise and looked up. If it were anyone else, there wouldn't be a second option. But you're a bit different, Qing said with a meaningful smile. With a wave of his sleeve, two beams of azure light shot out, hovering in mid-air. These are the two most powerful martial arts techniques of the Azure Dragon Hall, both at the level of top-tier spirit martial arts. If you master them, surpassing your current limits won't be a problem. Two top-tier spirit martial arts? Lin Dong was stunned. He hadn't expected Qing to be so generous, offering two powerful techniques right off the bat. Such martial arts would be fiercely contested by even the most powerful dynasties outside. And what's the second choice? Lin Dong asked, his eyes blinking as he refrained from immediately accepting the techniques. This is the inheritance of the Azure Dragon Hall. Qing smiled and stared at Lin Dong. And the second choice is my own inheritance. This time, not only was Lin Dong taken aback, but even little Mink was startled. Wasn't Qing the master of the Azure Dragon Hall? Ancient matters are too complicated to explain. So, which do you choose? Qingji waved his hand dismissively, not offering any further explanation, as his eyes locked onto Lin Dong. Lin Dong furrowed his brows and thought for a moment before slowly saying, the latter. The latter option was, of course, Qingji's own inheritance. Lin Dong didn't fully understand who Qingji really was, but from the looks of it, he seemed quite formidable. Heh, clever little fellow, Qingji smiled, stretching lazily before saying, very well, but remember, if we meet again and you haven't reached my standards, I will take everything back. Lin Dong was just about to nod when he suddenly froze, shocked. Meet again? You're not dead? Meet again? Wasn't this guy from ancient times? By now, wouldn't he be long dead, with not even a trace left behind? How would they meet again? Seeing the stunned expressions on Lin Dong and Little Mink's faces, a strange smile appeared on Qingji's face. In a quiet voice, he said, who told you that I'm dead? Above the vast sea of lightning, dark clouds churned, and bolts of thunder poured down from the sky, rumbling endlessly across the horizon. Yet, in a certain part of the sea, the atmosphere suddenly froze. Two shocked pairs of eyes stared in disbelief at the shadowy figure sitting atop the Azure dragon, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. Qingji didn't elaborate further, merely casting a gentle smile down at Lin Dong and Little Mink. Under his gaze, Lin Dong finally snapped out of his daze, his expression complicated as he stared at Qingji, muttering to himself, how is that possible? It truly seemed impossible. Qingji was practically an ancient figure, and no one knew how long he had lived. The strong individuals from that era wouldn't even leave behind corpses after they died. How could one still be alive? It's true that normal people couldn't live until now, but for a superpower who has surpassed the life and death realm, that's another story, Little Mink said slowly, having also recovered from the shock. That level of power, even in ancient times, such beings were among the very highest in existence. Surpassed the life and death realm, Lin Dong felt a tremor in his heart. That realm was far too foreign to him. He couldn't help but wonder if the old man He Tong he had encountered in the Great Desolate Tablet had reached this level at his peak. It seemed the Azure Dragon King Qingji before him was indeed quite a mysterious figure. As far as I know, during ancient times, the world suffered a great calamity. Most of the top-tier experts perished during that time, Little Mink said, deep in thought. A calamity? Lin Dong blinked in confusion, his mind suddenly recalling the ancient massacre he had witnessed through the remains in the Great Desolate Tablet. The dark, cold, and evil entities that even He Tong, with his devouring ancestral talisman, had struggled to contend with. Could there be a connection between the two? It seems the heavenly demon Mink clan's inherited memories aren't as fragmented as I thought. You even remember the ancient calamity, Qingji smiled again. But as soon as he mentioned the word calamity, Lin Dong noticed a shift in his gaze, as if even this mysterious figure was haunted by the memory. Clearly, the calamity had left a deep and unforgettable scar. Thinking of this, Lin Dong couldn't help but feel a chill. Was the calamity truly that terrifying, to the point where even someone as powerful as Qingji still felt uneasy? I was lucky to survive that ordeal, Qingji continued with a faint chuckle. Of course, at that time, my strength was not particularly exceptional. It was only later that I became more accomplished. Otherwise, I, too, would have perished in that catastrophe. Qingji smiled faintly, pulling his mind back from the distant memories of the ancient past. His gaze then settled on Lin Dong as he said, you seek my inheritance, quite the ambitious goal. But let's hope your strength matches your ambition. Lin Dong's eyes narrowed slightly, and without further words, he slowly clasped his fists in respect toward Qingji. Seeing this, Qingji raised an eyebrow. His slender hand slipped out of his green robe, and at his fingertips, a radiant azure light began to gather and swirl. Whoosh! With a flick of Qingji's finger, the azure light surged forward, quickly forming a miniature azure dragon in midair. Its scales gleamed with brilliance, and even from a distance, Lin Dong could feel a wave of dangerous energy emanating from it. The inheritance I wish to give you is within this. Whether you can claim it depends on your abilities, Qingji said as he stood up on top of the Azure Dragon's shadow. With a wave of his sleeve, the miniature Azure dragon roared skyward, causing the dark clouds above to churn violently as bolts of thunder crashed down in a torrent. Boom! The sky was filled with lightning, yet the scales of the miniature Azure dragon only grew brighter. In the next moment, it whipped its tail, shattering the bolts of thunder into countless sparks. The lightning dissipated, but the Azure dragon had already transformed into a beam of azure light, descending toward Lin Dong with the force of a cataclysm. The shockwave it carried felt as though it could obliterate anything in its path. Even before the azure light touched the sea surface, the area of the Thunder Sea where Lin Dong stood was already being crushed down, forming a massive depression nearly 100 meters wide. As the azure light reflected in Lin Dong's eyes, his face grew serious. He could feel the terrifying power within it. If he were hit directly, not even his resilience could save him from immediate death. But retreat wasn't an option. If he wanted to obtain the inheritance, he had to earn Qing Ji's recognition. This attack was clearly a test. If he couldn't withstand it, then he might as well settle for the Azure Dragon Hall's inheritance. Someone as prideful as Qing Ji would never grant his personal legacy to a weakling. Without hesitation, Lin Dong began to gather all his primordial energy, spiritual energy, and devouring power, channeling them into the ancient cosmic formation above his energy core. Zing! 5 gray-black pillars of light shot up from Lin Dong's body, tearing through the clouds and scattering the thunderbolts that raged within. This power! Qing Ji's eyes widened slightly as he observed the beams of light rising from Lin Dong's body. A fusion of energies? Primordial energy, spiritual energy, and another, devouring power? The devouring ancestral talisman? The surprise in Qing Ji's eyes deepened as he recognized the forces Lin Dong had combined. His discerning gaze immediately identified the origin of Lin Dong's fused power. I didn't expect the devouring ancestral talisman to end up in your hands. So, Hei Tong has fallen as well, Qing Ji muttered softly, his gaze dimming momentarily. Great Wilderness Celestial Prison Finger. The 5 gray-black pillars of light merged into 5 massive ancient fingers, which then combined into a single colossal hand, as if it had torn through the void from ancient times. Behind the giant hand, the very fabric of space cracked and shattered, revealing a towering silhouette that flickered faintly as though it transcended all of creation. The Great Wilderness Celestial Prison Finger was the most powerful martial art Lin Dong could currently unleash, fueled by the strongest form of his fusion power. This strike was undoubtedly the pinnacle of his strength. Great Wilderness Celestial Prison Finger. The martial art of the Emperor of the Great Desolation? Huh? You're truly full of surprises. Qing Ji's gaze grew complex as he looked at the faint silhouette emerging from the void. Break! Lin Dong roared, his entire body surging with battle intent. Primordial energy poured out of him, practically becoming tangible. He lifted his head high and fearlessly stepped forward. His hand clenched into a fist, and the colossal gray-black hand above roared down from the sky. Boom! Boom! Thunderous explosions echoed across the sea of lightning. It was as if the entire ocean trembled beneath the might of that enormous hand. The giant hand roared down, colliding head-on with the azure light under the watchful eyes of Lin Dong and the others. Boom! The moment of impact caused even space itself to tremble. Towering waves of lightning plasma erupted in all directions, sweeping Lin Dong hundreds of meters away. Fortunately, after half a month of enduring the lightning sea, Lin Dong's body had gradually adapted to the environment. Crack! Despite being thrown back, Lin Dong's gaze remained fixed on the point of impact. Then, he heard a faint cracking sound. His eyes immediately narrowed, and a surge of joy spread across his face, because that cracking sound came from the shattering azure light. Having exhausted his most powerful technique, it was clear Lin Dong had emerged victorious. The azure light shattered swiftly, and within a few brief seconds, it completely disintegrated. From its core, a faint azure beam shot out, piercing through the air and striking Lin Dong's body. In that instant, the azure beam enveloped Lin Dong, but it caused him no harm. Instead, as it struck, He felt an overwhelming flood of information rushing into his mind. With arms outstretched, Lin Dong let the azure light rage through his body, closing his eyes to absorb the vast amount of knowledge that poured into his consciousness. The torrent of information eventually coalesced into 3 ancient, deep azure characters. Sky-transforming dragon art. The 3 words carried an immense, majestic power, radiating an indescribable sense of authority. This was the inheritance Qing Ji had bestowed. Above the lightning sea, azure light surged, and within that light, a figure floated midair. Thunder continued to crash down from the stormy clouds, but within a 10-meter radius of this figure, there was a calm, thunder-free zone, as if even the lightning feared to approach. Qing Ji stood with his hands behind his back, his gaze fixed on the figure wrapped in azure light. A gentle smile of appreciation crossed his refined features. The earlier attack would have been impossible for someone who had survived 2 nirvana tribulations, yet Lin Dong, with just the strength of the first nirvana stage, had managed to withstand it. His performance was, to say the least, impressive. The devouring ancestral talisman. It's been so many years since I last encountered one, Qing Ji murmured softly, a trace of nostalgia in his voice. On the lightning sea, little Mink watched Lin Dong, still encased in the azure light, without any sign of worry. Instead, it turned its gaze to Qing Ji and remarked, "Didn't expect you to be so generous." With its sharp eye, it could clearly see how formidable the inheritance Qing Ji had given to Lin Dong was. It seems the heavenly demon Mink clan has managed to preserve its legacy quite well. Your clan's old ancestor wasn't lacking in skill, considering he could safeguard your people through such a time, Qing Ji replied, casting a faint smile at little Mink. Upon hearing this, the mischievous grin on little Mink's face gradually faded, replaced by an unusual solemnity. As a member of the heavenly demon Mink clan, it fully understood the weight of Qing Ji's mention of its ancestor. What exactly happened back then? Little Mink hesitated briefly before finally asking the question that had been on its mind. Though it possessed some inherited memories, they were faint and incomplete. All it knew was that during the ancient times, the world's strongest beings had been almost entirely wiped out by a great calamity. In that catastrophe, countless top-tier experts had perished. Qing Ji pressed his lips together and hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. "You'll find out someday, but not now." Little Mink frowned. It could tell that Qing Ji was extremely wary of the so-called calamity, perhaps even fearful. This discovery made even little Mink, who had always been fearless, feel a chill in its heart. Qing Ji's strength far surpassed little Mink's peak, and yet even someone of his power was so frightened by the ancient catastrophe. Just how terrifying could that disaster have been? Could there really be something in this world that had the power to annihilate nearly 90% of the strongest ancient experts? As little Mink was still in shock, a deep roar suddenly echoed from within the swirling azure light. It seemed to be Lin Dong's voice, but there was an unusual resonance to it, a power that made it different from a normal human shout. Little Mink's gaze focused on Lin Dong, and he saw that Lin Dong's body within the azure light was subtly writhing, as if something inside him was trying to break free. Yet, it seemed as though something was missing, preventing the breakthrough from being fully realized. To cultivate the sky-transforming dragon art, the essence of a heavenly dragon is essential. Without it, one can't even begin, Qing Ji said with a smile, watching as Lin Dong struggled within the azure light. Heavenly dragon essence? Doesn't that make the inheritance you gave him useless? Little Mink frowned. The essence of a true dragon was something only creatures with pure dragon bloodlines possessed, and obtaining it was no easy feat. Qing Ji chuckled and waved his sleeve. The giant azure dragon beneath him roared and transformed into a deep azure beam of light, shooting off into the distance. As the deep azure light shot across the sky, a powerful aura spread out, one that little Mink immediately recognized. The essence of a heavenly dragon? Sensing the familiar energy, little Mink nodded slowly in understanding. Whoosh! The deep azure beam streaked across the sky and directly entered Lin Dong's body. The azure light surrounding him solidified, and his body began to writhe violently. Groans of pain could be heard coming from him as he struggled to contain the energy. The essence of a heavenly dragon is the foundation of a dragon's cultivation. A typical human body cannot easily contain it, but I've provided him with everything he needs. Whether he can subdue this precious energy depends on his own ability. If he cannot pass this first test, he will never master the sky-transforming dragon art, Qing Ji said calmly as he watched Lin Dong struggle. Little Mink didn't say much in response. It was well aware that heavenly dragon essence was a treasure even to many human experts. If one could refine it, it would greatly strengthen their physical body. However, this essence belonged to the dragon race, and for a human to absorb it with their relatively fragile body required taking significant risks. Still, Little Mink had faith in Lin Dong. If he could subdue the devouring ancestral talisman, the heavenly dragon essence, while formidable, shouldn't be too difficult for him to handle. Roar! Under the watchful eyes of Little Mink and Qing Ji, the figure enveloped in azure light began to struggle more violently. Waves of energy surged continuously from within. Boom, boom, boom. In his agony, Lin Dong lashed out with his fists, unleashing terrifying blasts of power that created massive craters in the lightning sea below. However, as the violent energy was vented, the painful groans from Lin Dong gradually subsided. Despite the ferocity of the heavenly dragon essence, Lin Dong's body was far from ordinary. After enduring the initial waves of pain, he slowly began to adapt to it. After all, Lin Dong had already become accustomed to enduring immense pain during his half-month journey through the lightning sea. As Lin Dong slowly adapted to the heavenly dragon essence raging within his body, the azure light on his skin began to writhe and shift wildly. Eventually, a hard, azure layer, resembling a dragon's scales, began to form on his skin. So, he's already starting to manifest the azure dragon skin, Qing Ji remarked with a smile, nodding approvingly. Roar! Another roar came from within the azure light, but this time it carried no trace of pain. Instead, it was clear and resonant. The figure within trembled, and then shot out from the swirling azure light, hovering steadily in midair. The figure was, of course, Lin Dong. At this moment, his entire body was enveloped in azure light, which had condensed into a special membrane on his skin. This membrane bore faint patterns resembling dragon scales. Looking down at his body with excitement, Lin Dong clenched his fists. He could feel the overwhelming power coursing through him. Compared to before, his strength had increased dramatically. What a powerful martial art! Lin Dong grinned, his eyes gleaming with excitement. The sky-transforming dragon art was somewhat similar to the demonic ape transformation he had practiced before, but the difference between the two was vast. According to the information he had absorbed, once the sky-transforming dragon art was fully mastered, his physical body would be as tough as a true dragon's. Everyone knew that the dragon race had the strongest physical bodies in the demon beast world. For a human to cultivate their body to such a terrifying level, this martial art was enough to shake the heavens and earth. Even though Lin Dong had only just scratched the surface, the strength of his physical body had already increased several times over. The layer of azure membrane on his skin might appear fragile, but its defensive power was likely stronger than his current nirvana golden body. Heh, to have cultivated the azure dragon skin so quickly, your talent is indeed remarkable. Qing Ji smiled, clearly pleased by Lin Dong's progress. Thank you, senior. Lin Dong quickly collected himself, his face becoming serious as he bowed respectfully to Qing Ji. He understood well how generous the gift he had received truly was. You being able to see my remnant shadow is a form of fate, Qing Ji said with a wave of his hand, then sighed meaningfully. Besides, having one more strong person in this world is always a good thing. Lin Dong was taken aback, clearly not understanding the deeper meaning behind Qing Ji's words. You'll understand in time. With the devouring ancestral talisman in your possession, there may come a time when even if you want to hide, you won't be able to, Qing Ji added with a smile, as if seeing through Lin Dong's confusion. Well, the inheritance is now yours, and my task as a remnant shadow is complete. Perhaps it's time for me to vanish from this world. As soon as Qing Ji finished speaking, Lin Dong noticed that his body had begun to fade, becoming more and more transparent. The Sea of Lightning will disappear after I'm gone. Within the Azure Dragon Hall, I've left behind a pill river. Consider it my final gift to you. Qing Ji's figure became increasingly ethereal, and at last, under Lin Dong's gaze, he completely disappeared from sight. Lin Dong, we will meet again in the future. I just hope that when that time comes, you won't disappoint me. My inheritance is not meant for the mediocre. As Qing Ji's figure vanished, his final words, laced with a light laugh, slowly echoed through the now quiet Sea of Lightning.